Okay, now you're good.
That was good anyway. Thank you for coming, and thank you so much for NOAA for providing the space to host these talks. As many of you know, this is a part of a series that the Ridge to Reef initiative is putting on, leading up to the Ridge to Reef Rendezvous that's taking place not this weekend, but the next on the west side. Does everybody already know about it? If you don't know about it, please pick up a flyer on your way out, or go check us out online. In addition to the talk tonight that we'll get into in a minute, we have another talk next week with Donald Brown on the west side at Kola Brewery. And this weekend, if you want to get wet or get on the land at Mama Ramp, we have a cleanup. It's a debris dive as well as a land-based cleanup, followed by the release of Kohola's specially brewed Reef Geeks beer. So excellent opportunity to come. Yes, being brewed to help support efforts from Ridge to Reef and improving things. So hope you come for the cleanup, but please at least come for the beer at noon. And then all the fantastic activities that we have taking place on the 26th at Kahekili Beach Park on that side. So, is there anything else I was supposed to plug? No? Okay, let's get into introducing Ivor. So it is my pleasure to welcome and introduce Ivor Williams. Some of you have worked with him for a long time, but for some of you, this might be an exotic species, so let's provide a little introduction. So he moved to Hawaii in 2003. He worked for DLNR's Department of Aquatic Resources for 6 years before switching to NOAA, where he's worked for the last 10 years. You'll detect when you hear him get at it that it seems plausible that he got his PhD in England at Newcastle University. And we're so fortunate to have him working here at Kahekili on the algae issues, because he has done a ton of work in that area in the Caribbean, working with the macroalgae problem there, which was the focus of his PhD work. So, so great we have him here in Hawaii. In terms of the things that show us how important he is and how lucky we are. To add to that list, we've got the head of the Reef and Fish Survey Program at NOAA, and he's the author of 56 papers. So that's quite something. He lives in Honolulu with his wife and kids, and in his free time, amazing that he still has some, he plays soccer in a 15 over league. It's my job to just embarrass him just a little bit. Ivor gets going. So he lives in Honolulu with his wife and 2 kids, and yes, enjoys movies as well as soccer. So I'm turning it over to Ivor.
Okay, thanks very much.
He's pretty bad.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so although I'm talking, I also want to highlight that this is all work that is being done by a variety of people. Russell Sparks in the front here, Major Haley, Darla, Donna Brown was involved in some of the surveys in the early years. So anyway, and it was a real collective effort, and it's pretty unusual that NOAA and DAR work closely together, and it's actually been really enjoyable for me. So I also warn you that I tend to mostly talk to scientists, and at times possibly going to be a bit too heavy on the graphs and nerdiness. But I think we have a really huge group, so if people want to stop and ask questions, let's do plenty of that, and I have no problem at all with that. Anyway, so Kahekili Herbivore Fish Management Area is about 10 years old, pretty much right about now. We've been working there since before it was established, and we have quite a lot of information, I think, give a pretty interesting story, I hope. So I'll just crack on with it. So for people, I'm not sure everyone may already know exactly what we're talking about. So this is Kahekili in West Maui. The Kahekili area is very heavily developed for tourism, extremely dense human stew in the waters here most of the time. And in spite of the fact, so there's also actually really quite a nice reef that's starting just offshore there. So, it's heavily used, it's important for tourism, it's a major sort of recreation area locally, I understand. And then on the right here, this is data from surveys we've done all around West Maui. And then the color of the dots is essentially how much coral there are. So, and then you can see that basically all the way along the side, there's little bits and pieces of coral. There's quite nice reefs inside bays, but there's only really 2 major reef areas, and that is this is the Kahekili area that's inside the Herbert Fish Management Area, and this is Canoe Beach along here, I think Waikuli, possibly call it quickly. So it's in West Maui terms, it's a very important reef for a lot of reasons. And then why did we get interested in it? because it also was rapidly declining through about the early part of the century, and a lot of it driven by these major macroalgal blooms. So this is a picture from 2001, and these are like summertime blooms that would last 2 or 3 months. And they were happening regularly along Hawaii through a lot of the 90s. And then certainly we don't entirely know how much they were hitting Kahekili, but this is a picture from Kahekili 2001. And here's a picture in 2005. The previous algae is an algae that's known to be very responsive to nutrient input, so it's probably reflecting the upslope ag that was happening through a lot of the earlier period. And then this algae, in contrast, is a very highly preferred food source for a lot of herbivorous fish. So it may be benefiting from nutrients input, but it's also the very fact that something like this becomes hyperabundant sort of tells you there's not enough herbivores there. So the reef have been experiencing these major blooms, and this is the data we have from one site in Kahekili Beach Park, gathered by Eric Brown, the Pacific Whale Foundation, later Brown. And essentially from 1994 through 2007, we've lost about 40% of all the coral decline. So it was a very nice reef, but it's definitely on the downward trajectory. And a lot of that appeared to be related to these algal blooms. So the dark green circle, triangle, is those are algal blooms that happened on the Kahekili Beach Reef. And then I just added these ones up here. So Hawaii was getting hit regularly with summertime algal blooms. I don't know if they were also impacting this particular reef area. So major decline, clearly driven, related to this algal bloom. And then also, at the later period here, the algae was a highly palatable algae for herbivorous fish. So probably multiple causes for these blooms in the decline, but one of the problems was there wasn't much grazing fish. And just to emphasize that, so these are data that DAR had at the time they were thinking of establishing the herbivore fishing management area. So these are all the locations across Hawaii that they had comparable data from shallow water reefs. And then the orange bottom part is their parrotfish biomass. Then blue is surgeonfish biomass, and the light blue are other types of fish that they were surveying. So essentially, there's big differences across a lot of the state. Maui pretty low, and this is Kahekili here, so you can see that Kahekili started being a pretty nice reef, had really low herbivore biomass, and particularly parrotfish. This is about 2005, 2006. So what the state of Hawaii did was to establish the Kahekili Herbivore Fishing Management Area in 2009. And it was at the time a really novel form of management. And within the boundaries, all herbivores are protected, herbivorous fish, sea urchins. But really importantly, other types of fishing are still permitted. And the reason for that is that the goal is not to close off the area and make it something that people can't use, but in fact the exact opposite is to keep it in really good condition so that it will be useful to provide multiple services to people over time. And a lot of people around the world are starting to think much more about trying to implement this form of management, and I think this may be one of the few occasions that Hawaii gives incredible resources to the world and sort of thoughtful resource management. Maybe there's many, actually. And so when I start showing you data, I'm also going to talk a lot about macroalgae and crustose coralline algae, so just so people are clear on what those terms mean. So macroalgae on the right, these are like large upright plants, usually canopy height, a couple of centimeters or more, can bloom, become super abundant at some times. And then that's usually a symptom essentially if there's not much grazing. So it's like if you have a field with not many sheep, you start to, instead of having grass, you end up with shrubland and bushes and so on. And then also sort of nutrient input can drive you to that range. And then on the right, this is crustose coralline algae, it's basically the pink rock. And so that is the other extreme of grazing pressure. Very, very heavily grazed places have a lot of coralline algae. And that is really important, healthy environment for corals, and especially for juvenile corals that thrive in that kind of condition. The juvenile corals will actually swim around and seek out crustose coralline algae as a suitable place for them to settle. And so, although when place was created, a lot of the concern was over these major blooms that were like having a huge effect. But it's really a bit more complicated than that. And it's essentially that this kind of continuum of conditions that are beneficial or detrimental for coral well-being. And when you have excessive algal growth, it's just corals put a lot of energy into fighting algae around the boundaries. Juvenile corals are going to find it really hard to settle in that kind of environment and probably will not survive. And in contrast to something like this, where you see there's a lot of coastal coralline, the turf that's there is really heavily grazed and it's very benign for corals. And if you look at this is a sort of close-up picture, you can see right around the edge of the coral, it's a very healthy condition. And if you were to do the same with macroalgae and peel it back, the coral here is just going to look like very pink and unwell, essentially, because it's fighting the algae and it has major microbial problems. So it makes a big difference to coral well-being if you're in the right-hand side of this graph, essentially. So a lot of other things affect corals, but one thing that Herbert mentioned can do is try to control this one factor. So I also want to emphasize that, it's always it's a slow process, this kind of management. So this was a figure we made up pretty much at the time that Herbivore Management Area was established, and I didn't change any of the data on this, any other sort of text on this one. So at the time, it takes a while for fish to recover once they've been protected. And other areas, other protected areas around the world, sometimes it takes 10, 15, 20 years before they reach the maximum. They can still be rising over periods that long. But you're probably going to need 3 to 5 years at least before you start to see really big changes. And that's what we expected. So that's the first thing you need. You need more herbivorous fish. That in turn will mean you're less likely to get macroalgal blooms, and you're more to the right-hand side of that continuum. But then, so that's just the first part. That's when corals can start to thrive a little better. But corals are pretty slow growing, especially in Hawaii, with really cooler water. We don't have the super fast growing species here. And also corals are just inherently slow growing, and especially from juveniles. It takes about 3 years for a coral to get to about 2 inches, 3 inches across. So even when conditions are better for them, before you start to see the real change on the reef, it's probably another few years. So this is our idea. Maybe we start to see the coral cover change around about 5 years, with between 5 and 10 years, we'll start to see the reef really recover if everything went really well. And then long term, this is the ultimate goal. It's a healthy growing reef, returning to its previous condition and capable of supporting multiple uses. And through time, when I look back on that, I'm kind of surprised how naive we were about climate change. We really didn't think about that at all, strangely. But also because Hawaii had never been hit by a major bleaching event before that time. In fact, before 2014-15, it's the main Hawaiian Islands. And so, we were looking forward to this sort of future of very healthy reef. And realistically now, our sort of perspective on all this has changed. Anyway, so let's start moving a bit closer to actually looking at some results. And so I just, here, this is the detail of the area. It's about 2 miles long. All the major reef areas up here. And then one of the first things we did is try to work out what type of reef there is and map it all so we could sample it. And up here, this is all sort of really nice, well-developed spur and groove. It's about 3 to 4 meters high. Certain points, probably a lot of people in this room have been in there quite a bit. I think there's quite a lot of sediment. Often it can be really murky up here, and when you get at the wrong time of the year or the wrong close to recent rainfall, it's really, really sometimes impossible for us to work. It's so murky. So this part here, this is what a lot of people think of as Kahekili. It's this shallow reef in front of the beach part. Starts right by the shore, it comes out to about 25 foot deep. And then this is kind of the thing I had no idea about before we started working here. It's this really nice reef that starts about 25, 30 feet, goes out to about 55 feet, and really well developed. Now very, very healthy reef offshore there. And so I will come back a little bit to looking at how these different areas did. And then for people who are not familiar with how we gather data, so we will go out twice a year, spend about a week out there, and we get fish data from what we call belt transects. So we randomly locate a starting point. They have a 25-meter line, and as we're laying out, we're counting all fish on either side of the line, estimating the size, and then from that you can get an estimate of how much biomass of fish there is. And so something we all routinely do. It's the same method we've used for 10 years. And then all the data from the photos comes from photo quadrants. Take a picture every meter, and then later extract data from that. So, compared to most things I've ever worked on, we actually have a tremendous amount of data. So, here is actually what we've seen over this time. So we started in 2008, prior to the place being established. And the most recent data we have is 2018, we didn't grab this year. So on the top are parrotfish, increased by 368%. So that means parrotfish biomass in 2018 was more than 4.5 times what it had been prior to the place being established, and surgeonfish have come back to some degree, but not as impressively, and they're nearly double, well, 1 to 2/3 what it was before. And so something worth noting is that surgeonfish are really long-lived. I don't know if people know that, but some surgeonfish live 40, 50 years. Kala, 53-year-old, is the oldest one caught in Hawaii. Even a yellow tang can reach 40 years. So, So surgeonfish in particular, elsewhere, often take a long time to really reach new equilibrium after a closure. And so it was a bit surprised. We saw this sort of gradual recovery, and you would have hoped for that to continue on for maybe another 10 years or 5-10 years at least, and that kind of leveled off. And I'll come to that in a little while. So still, anyways, overall, very positive change. And something else that's really, I think, important is all the extra biomass of parrotfish was in larger size classes. So, and the way I'm showing this is little 2-year blocks. This is the first 2 years, the next 2 years, and so on. And each of these is a 5-centimeter block. This is 10 to 15, 15 to 20. And so just looking at how much of the biomass of parrotfish is in each size class. And you can see that in the first year, it's spread across the smaller size classes, almost nothing in the larger size classes. And then for the later ones, every time the lighter block is the additional biomass we've got in each size class. So hopefully that's clear to everyone. And the point is that we've always had small fish. We have the same number of small fish we always had. But what happens now, since closure, is those small fish become big fish. And so all the growth has been small fish surviving longer, becoming bigger, and then they're a totally different community. It used to be dominated essentially by these, the ones at the top, the sort of smaller, medium-sized ones, and now these things are super abundant, and especially in the deeper reef habitats. And I don't know anywhere else in Hawaii that I've been where there's more of these big parrots at the Kahekili beach, deeper reefs like that. So, in some ways it's really positive, but let's look a little more detail about what we've seen. And then here, I'm just looking at the change within certain species. And so at the top, group these into small, medium-sized parrotfish and the 2 large species at the bottom. So probably people already know this already, but we have quite a few of these smaller ones, but these 2 is the bullethead and then the pale nose dominate the biomass in a place like Kahekili. And they have done extremely well. And then we also in Hawaii have larger parrotfish. We have 2 species of large body parrotfish, the red lip and the spectacle at the bottom. And if you go somewhere where there's no people, Hamakua Coast, Niihau, Northwest Hawaiian Islands, a lot of the parrotfish biomass is dominated by these really big ones. But they tend to be much less common in the main island and most of the sort of accessible parts of the main islands. Part of that might be a habitat thing, but these can become very abundant. So scale of this graph, this is 1.4, this is 16. So that even at their peak, these are about a 10th of the level of the graph above. So they started at very, very low level, they're perceptible, and they were starting to come back really nicely. And around about 2013, we were getting really optimistic that they were going to hugely recover. And especially like this guy, the spectacle parrotfish, you don't tend to see that often, in my experience, in easily accessible reefs around Hawaii. And we were starting to see them somewhat commonly, not super large by then, but these ones can live a long time. So they take a long time to grow to their max size. And then around about 2013, 14, the numbers just tailed away. And then the last few times we hardly see any at all. So, that's not ideal. These are, we'll come to that in maybe a little while. But, and then when we look at surgeonfish, we actually get a pretty similar pattern. So the small ones, which Kobe, brown surgeon, and yellow tang, have done really, really well. And I don't know if the reef could support a huge amount more of them right now, frankly. But then the big guys, the Kala, and I'm actually not sure the nasolaterales, they also show the same pattern. They were starting to increase around about 2013, 14, and then tailed away. So essentially the big ones, which are the most desirable fishery targets across multiple tags, have both disappeared about the same kind of time. And they're also ones that tend to be more common in shallower, more accessible habitats. So just I think it's very likely that there's been a little bit of breakdown of fishery protection in the shallow accessible parts. And I don't think it's very many people at all. These things were never reached great numbers in the time that it was closed. But I think it's very hard to understand how else they would have all declined in the same period of time. And just also, when I look at by habitat zone, so these are the three habitats. This is for Groove, Deeper Reef, and this is the Beach Park Reef. And there's like a car park right here. You can walk right in from shore. If you want to get in the water here, you have to swim fairway or just put a little more work into it. So when you look at the by habitat, the deeper ones have done really, really well. So right here, Spur and Groove, and this one, the Deeper Reef. And then the Beach Park area, it's come along a little bit, but it definitely has not risen to the same level. So again, this shallow area just not doing super well, whereas everywhere else is going gangbusters, basically. And then we see the same thing for surgeon fish. The deeper ones have done pretty well. And then this blue line is the shallow Beach Park Reef, which is really not done anything at all. So when you sum up the fish biomass, the deeper, more accessible areas have done incredibly well, and they really, really well. The shallow area appeared to be doing pretty well for about the first 5-6 years, but most of those gains have been lost over the last few years. And essentially, we're not far back off where we started. So, coming back to the real purpose of the Kahekili area was not to increase the number of parrotfish, but to see if that would actually lead to a healthier reef. And so this is the data on the algal community. So this is the first step with more parrotfish and other grazing fish. Would that lead to a healthier reef that was more suitable for coral growth? And without question, that is true. That has happened. So here, this is CCA, the crustless coralline algae, the pink algae that is very benign for corals. That's increased about 6-7-fold. Some of the deeper habitats is way more abundant than that. It's one of the dominant benthic types. And macroalgae, we've had no major blooms in the time since the place was created, and it's sort of faded away, other than the shallow beach park where herbivores not really recovered. There's very little macroalgae around that reef now. The other thing I just want to also stress, so it's a lot harder for us to give good data on turf cover. So everything that's not CCA or macroalgae is some form of turf. And so when we started, a lot of the benthos looked like this. You can sort of see it's like slightly fuzzy, green or brown. And that's sort of okay for a coral, but it's not perfect. Corals are still dealing a little bit with some sort of fight around their egg, especially if it's a little bit thicker like this one, maybe starts to trap sediment. This is a far less, it's nowhere near as bad as like extreme macroalgal growth, but this is like not an ideal situation for reefs. And now, especially in the deeper habitats, a lot of reefs are more like this, where everything that's not, it's very heavily cropped. There's almost no sort of conspicuous algal growth. And then, so this is just, overall, there's no question that the benthic community is like far, far better for coral well-being than it was before the place was established, maybe outside of the shallow area. So anyway, what is this actually meant for corals? So, the first steps of the chain are there, the more herbivorous fish, the environment's far better for corals. What do we see? And so when we, first surveys we did in 2018, we had 40% coral cover across the entire area, and that was declining rapidly, and it bottomed out about 2012. So it was declining rapidly, that kind of arrested and stopped at that point. Things started moving up, and so this is 2013-14. The highest point we got here is 2014, and so the recovery is not huge, but this is pretty much exactly what we would have hoped for at the time the area was established. It takes a few years for herbivores to start to increase. Algae community becomes better for corals, and then corals gradually will start to rebound. And at this point, it was looking really good. And then what happened in 2015, the biggest coral bleaching event in record in Hawaii, and quite a devastating event across a lot of the main Hawaiian Islands. And so actually, when we went out in the spring of 2015, that was the highest coral cover we've seen anywhere. But by the time we got out later in 2015 for the autumn, some coral was already dead, right in the middle of the event. And so when we come back afterwards in 2016, it's also a bit lower still. And one of that was still the residual effect of the 2015 bleaching event. We've only been out one time since, and so there's not much recovery over the whole area. It's not too surprising. It can often take a little while for the place to recover from the bleaching event. But many areas in Hawaii were hit far, far worse than this by the bleaching event, just for the record. And so just to give a slightly simpler kind of story. So the shallow reef in many ways has not really benefited. I think protection has not been effective in there. The deeper areas have done really well. The spur and groove zone is somewhat affected by sedimentation on a fairly regular basis. And the deeper reef is the one area that is really enormously benefited from herbivore management in terms of the fish population, and also doesn't have a lot of other sort of stressors that are affecting it. And so when you look just at what happened in this area, again, you see the same pattern, rapid decline, bottoming out, starting to come back pretty nicely with the bleaching event, and then we actually have seen a little bit of recovery there. So overall, there's a lot of good things that happen in the Kahekili fisherman area since it was established. It's undoubtedly a better environment for coral growth now. Now the community is far more suited to coral well-being. And up until about mid-2015, everything was exactly on track as we could possibly have hoped. And that bleaching event hammered it pretty hard and reset everything. So it's, I think without that, we would be in a situation now where we would be talking about the undoubted success of the herbivore fishery management area. Right now, let's maybe call it a qualified success, because I think things are a lot better than they would have otherwise been. So definitely potential for further improvement, especially in a shallow area. And so, I don't know if anyone's interested, but we did publish these results, and I can share that paper with anyone. They're also available if you search online, both Ivor Williams. It's freely available. And so, but the bleaching event really changes the way that we should think about, what is the purpose of herbivore management or at Kahekili or anywhere else. And really and truly, at least in the tall, medium term, reefs are not going to recover the condition they were in the mid-90s. And so I think we should think a little bit about bleaching. So just quickly, actually going to summarize it. So just to come back to where we were at the start, we definitely got more fish and urchins, the environment's better. Corals started to improve, got hammered in the 2014 event, and we're not really sure what's going to happen in the future. So I think let's talk about coral bleaching. Possibly everyone in the room already knows this already, but I'm just going to quickly go through it. So coral tissue lives in a symbiotic relationship with algae, called zooxanthellae. And so those algae provide about 90% of their food, and also give the coral color. And when temperatures rise, instead of that being a beneficial relationship for corals, they start to, they're less productive and they start to use more energy. So actually they're net loss for corals to have zooxanthellae when temperatures rise a little bit, even quite a small amount above what they're used to. And at that point, the corals expel the zooxanthellae. And then the corals appear white, so because the tissue itself has no color, you just see the coral skeleton underneath. And so, so the coral can survive like that for a certain point, but it's lost 90% of its food source. So they're essentially starving, and if the bleaching continues for a number of weeks, they will die. And then the coral itself, the tissue itself will die, and the coral will become overgrown. If on contrast, the temperature drops, they're going to come back to this state and gradually reacquire those zooxanthellae for a period of weeks to months. So what we're seeing, anytime you see a bleach reef, the first sign of bleaching when they're bright crystal white, is that the coral is still healthy, but it's just basically starving. And then the really disturbing thing for corals is that this change can happen over fairly small rises in temperature. So corals are really precisely adapted to their long-term temperature regime, and even rise about 2 degrees centigrade is enough to cause them to start bleaching or become vulnerable to bleaching. Sorry, 2 degrees Fahrenheit, 1 degree centigrade. So that 2015 event, we have really good data from Kona about what it did to corals there. And this comes from DAR's 23 sites, so 50% of the coral in Kona died in that one summer in 2015. So, wow. Yeah, pretty catastrophic, yeah. And then Maui didn't get hit as badly. We don't have quite as good data, but it's probably at least 20% of the coral. I don't know if you agree with that, Russell, but I think it's potentially a bit more of the coral died. And then Uluwatu, unfortunately, one of the sort of nicest coral reefs on the side of the island, was particularly badly hit. And so this is just a picture of the pretty well-known coral big mama, 8 meters across, many decades old. I don't know if you have hundreds. Okay, like 300 years old, yeah. And then this is a picture of it in 2015. So the brown is, most of the tissues died, grown by algae. So more than 90% of it died. So, It's not really as tall. And so the worst, in fact, just to make it even more is that it's going to get a lot worse probably fairly soon. And so this year, these are like the warmest month in any single year from 1950 onward. And so there's obviously variability from year to year. But corals, Hawaii, West Maui corals are kind of well adapted to temperature range about this as a summer max. Some are about 80 degrees. So when temperature rises of about 82, they're vulnerable to bleaching, especially if it persists for any length of time. So it used to be that only really hot years, there's natural variability, that some really hot year would push it over that bleaching threshold. And then more recently, as the sort of the overall trend has persisted, we're starting to get them more frequently, getting really close to that. 2015 went way over. This is 2019. A month ago, or whatever, people were worried this is going to be the worst event ever. It's still not totally clear to me how bad it is, but I think the temperature rise is not going to be as high as 2015. And then when we look forward, this is projected temperature from IPCC. The real bad news is that within about 20 to 30 years, we're going to be likely getting temperature above the bleaching threshold every single year, at which point it will be very hard for corals to survive. So that's pretty bad news happening. So anyway, so just, I think that really means that we should think differently about what we're trying to achieve as sort of conservationists or managers of coral reefs. And so bottom line is corals can acclimatize to rising temperatures, but the rate of change is something that they're just completely not able to deal with, almost certainly. Nobody really knows exactly what's going to happen. There's some greater or lesser optimistic people within the coral reef world. But in general, just the rate of change in temperature is just so rapid that corals are highly unlikely to be able to deal with it. And we may be in a situation within the next few decades where essentially reefs are almost lost. There will still be some corals, but we just won't have reefs as we are. So this is a source of alarm. I don't think that we should need to despair, though, is my point. And what we should do is do everything we can to buy more time for coral reefs. And what I mean by that is that, if other stressors are removed, corals have a fighting chance to last a bit longer, maybe 30, 40 years instead of 20 years. And then we're just in a situation where if humanity can deal with climate change, or we can give corals more time to acclimatize, we can actually give them a much better chance of recovery rather than just being completely wiped out over the next few decades. So more herbivores are definitely help to give them an edge. There's a lot of other things we should be doing too. And sedimentation, nutrients are really, really big factors. But it's basically really urgent for coral reefs that action on multiple fronts is all the only chance they have to. Okay, so anyway, on that uplifting note, I just want to, that's it, I'm going to wrap up. So thanks, a lot of people added to the data over the years, and very appreciative of all those efforts. So if you have any questions, just let me know.
Very depressing, Ivor.
Well, it is.
So you don't think corals have much ability to adapt to that?
Well, I mean,
temperature
I don't
increase?
think anybody really knows right now. So corals do have some ability to adapt. So places, well, okay, maybe John wants to answer the question, but so there are places in Hawaii that got a little bit bleached in 2014, and they got bleached again in 2015, and it's like Oahu was more hit in 2014. And a lot of corals that were hit in 2015 that previously did a little bit better, not as badly damaged. And when they've done tank returns, corals, again, they can somewhat adapt, but there's a limit, it's likely a limit to that. And the rate of change so if temperature rises 1 or 2 degrees centigrade and stops there, or the rate of change slows, they have a far better chance of dealing with it. If we just keep going up and up and up, then we'll have a lot of problems, not just corals will be at the leading edge of that.
Wow. So 20 years, you said?
I think it's pretty, pretty much everyone who does this kind of stuff would tell you it's likely. Yeah.
So then the protection for the condos and stuff be destroyed too?
Well, okay, so that is probably, that's global, that's sea level rise and things like that. So I don't honestly don't know, but I don't think we're gonna be engulfed with water in the next 20 or 30 years. I think it's more like 50 years or 80 years, so.
But as sea level rises, a healthy coral reef grows
Sure.
as well, right? So if the coral's not growing and it's eroding and the sea level is rising,
Yeah.
you are gonna lose a
Well, we're gonna have a
substantial
whole
amount.
raft of other problems.
I was thinking more of the protection
Coastal
for
erosion.
from the big waves.
Oh, yeah.
Right, so you're gonna lose
Okay.
some of that effect as corals erode, they're no longer keeping pace to the rising sea level. That's not gonna break up the wave energy as much, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And generally, if the corals are not actively growing, then they're eroding. There's a lot of,
One or
energy,
the
wave
other,
energy,
huh?
yeah, it's not like the reef built and then it just stays there, right? It's not. If it's not growing anymore, it's gonna start to erode a bit.
So I understand that coral farming has its issues,
Yeah.
but what do you think about that? Do you think that we have any potential with that for,
Yeah.
more resilient corals to put out on our
Yeah, I
reefs?
do actually. I do. Yeah. I don't know that much about it, but I mean, I think there's a lot of people putting a huge amount of effort into that, and on multiple fronts, yeah, there's hope from that. But I mean, the thing is, it's really hard to scale. That is the issue right now. So we have like 1,000 square kilometers of reef in Hawaii, and then 1 meter of reef that's like 50 colonies or whatever. So actually putting out enough corals to actually make a difference is pretty hard.
Yeah.
So what people are trying to do is like breed in en masse and release larvae and stuff like that. And I mean, that's all in its infancy. A lot of that stuff, but people taking it incredibly seriously with huge sums of money. But I mean, I think hopefully things will move in the next 3 years.
The downside to that, though, is that people are starting to put a huge amount of money into that.
Not.
And, it doesn't really matter if you're not gonna address these local stressors.
Yeah.
You can grow corals in a lab all you want, but, we
Yeah.
still pollute our
Well,
coastal
I think
reefs
people are
with
trying to
sediment.
grow tougher corals.
Yeah, and so, I mean, if you go like in 2015, Molokini bleached white.
Yeah.
Basically as white could be, right? But you only had about 10% coral mortality.
Only
Oahu
10%?
bleached white, and there was
Yeah.
40 to 60% coral mortality. And Oahu had the added stressors of sediment in the system and nutrients coming from land, whereas Molokini is out in the middle of the channel and it's not being affected by those added stressors. And so it just seems to me, again, if you focus back in on local actions to make, like we did at Kahekili, to try to change the system and steer it more towards a situation where corals can thrive, the corals that do survive the bleaching events will be the ones reproducing or spreading out, filling that open space.
In
Maybe
Ka-
I'm an optimist by
In
nature.
Kahekili, did they also control the roy, the peacock group?
Well, it wasn't
No.
prohibited, so
Yeah,
people.
they're not actually, they're not usually one in Kahekili.
They're not.
I would not say so. I mean, well, you think that? I also, I mean, I honestly feel like most people who work on Roy kind of feel like it's a red herring. And, because, we have a lot of predatory fish. We have a huge amount of moray eels. So they're, it's a new thing, Roy, but I mean, they're not engulfing the total number of predators. We always had predators. They're competing with other benthic predators like moray eels. They're the kind of ambush predators. They just sit there and grab something like a moray eel. And so, maybe locally when they can become hyper abundant, it's a bit of a problem. But I would say most coral reef scientists would say Roy would be pretty low on our list of things we need to worry about, in all honesty.
Oh, really? Because we swim at Kanahen dumps,
Okay.
and they're prolific everywhere.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean.
I mean, like 100 in a mile.
Okay, sounds like a pretty big number, yeah. Okay, I mean, I don't know all the places in Maui, but I mean, Kahekili is nothing like that for sure. And actually, there's probably several hundred moray eels as well, which they're pretty cryptic and hard to see. And even if you see a couple, there's So, I mean, I think it's kind of not understood so much that, they're kind of conspicuous, Roy, so, I mean, people focus on it a little bit more than the real impact they have on that. So I'm not in any way denying, there are places where they become very abundant and they're an issue, but we have a lot of other bigger issues in my opinion.
Well, I mean, the thing to bear in mind is predators feed on the smaller, weaker,
Sure.
easily. So predation has in effect a positive result, whereas fishing tends to prey on the larger, more dominant individuals, and so they can have a real negative result. A lot of times people confound the two, and as long as it's a predator killing fish, they feel it should be the same as fishing, but it has a lot to do with how you're targeting things. And in Hawaii, and particularly in a lot of heavily fished areas, we fish down the natural predators.
Right.
And so Roy, because they're avoided, because you can't eat them because of ciguatera, are actually probably filling a very important predation role
Oh,
that's missing because we fish down those natural predators to a certain level. And it's analogous to things that happen on land too. There's a lot of alien birds like pheasants and francolins and whatnot.
really?
And they replace native birds that were hunted to extinction early on. And they're important to spread seeds and other types of things. So without those birds, you wouldn't have that function. So people, they equate like, oh, pigs are bad, so they think any alien thing in the ocean would be bad as well. And it's just not that simple. I think. We don't discourage people from spearing Roy. We'd rather them spear Roy than uhus, parrotfish, and things like that. But
And is it, are we the only place in Indo-Pacific area where you can spear the parrotfish with a scuba tank?
I don't know if we're the only place. I mean, certainly a lot of other countries have banned that practice. We haven't gotten there yet. Maybe we will. It's
It's quite hard to enforce. A lot of people do it at night.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy
Yeah.
to catch a lot of parrotfish at night when they're sleeping. So, one thing to have a rule, another thing to actually be able to make it stick.
Enforcement.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, but I think if we were to ban that, nighttime spearfishing or scuba spearfishing in general, there may be some violations, but it would not be that hard to get some compliance. People would see lights out there.
Yeah, you would think.
It's just that it's a real political hot button thing. They did it in Kona, and it took several years off the Kona biologist's life. Pulling his hair out, it became very, very heated. But I think it probably will happen. I think we get to the point where we have to do something to protect these herbivores, particularly these large parrotfish.
Well,
Yeah.
Russell, you still have plenty of hair.
Thank you.
You can
That
work
means
on
I
that.
can afford to pull some hair out.
So as the state moves us towards the 30 by 30 marine managed effort,
Yes.
what messages from working on this, in Kahekili for all this time,
Yeah.
what are the top 3 things from this that you think could be transferred? Because eventually that process will make it out to the community. And,
Okay.
we have community
Yeah.
here, and I think it's interesting for people to know
Ah,
what can we
Okay.
kind of bring
Yeah.
forward.
Okay, I think Kahekili is kind of a perfect place to do it because there was a clear problem. There's an algal problem with major summer algal blooms. So one, you have to have a problem that you're trying to deal with. And so there are plenty of places in Hawaii that don't have excessive algal growth. Adding more herbivores to that is not going to make the situation better. So it's a fairly simple first step is there a problem to deal with. And then the second issue is that whether you have a reasonable hope of enforcing it. And, whether it's, actually, is the reason why you haven't got enough herbivores because there's too much fishing, or is it just simply that the reef itself is not able to support them? So you need to have a problem, you need to have an ability that the reef is going to recover, that herbivores can recover if you protect it. And, it's not that hard to identify the situations, I don't think. But I mean, it takes a little thought and, potentially some kind of experimental or focused work there. And I don't know, honestly, I think the third one.
trees.
Ivor, if you're thinking about bleaching, right, and the effect of a heavy bleaching is gonna be a lot of substrate suddenly becomes available that was taken up by living coral.
Yeah.
Wouldn't there be an advantage to making sure that your herbivory population is at its highest possible level?
Yeah.
Because it's gonna kind of balance itself with the food source anyway, right? And so suddenly when you open up more space,
Yeah.
you would think in
Yeah,
that
yeah.
case then they could start to
Yeah.
feed a little bit.
Okay, no, that's a pretty good point, yeah.
Right.
So, so I guess if you are looking forward to an expectation that we're gonna have a lot less coral, you may wanna have abundant herbivores in a whole bunch of places, because even if you don't have a problem right now, you probably have a problem quite sometime fairly soon. That's really what you're saying, so.
Well, and I think about like Molokini, for example, where you don't have the nutrient input that you're getting along the coastline.
Yeah.
And there's herbivores out there, but they're not very big. There's, you know, the large species of parrotfish that are half the size that they are when you see them around Maui and whatnot. So likely they're there and they're kind of starving, but they found a little balance, right, based on whatever nutrients or algae is available. So now if suddenly things bleach and opens up a much more area and more algae starts to fill in and grow, they should be able to respond to that a little quicker.
Yeah,
And so if you're in that kind of state where you've maxed out your herbivory
yeah.
based on the nutrients, then when more space opens up and more algae starts to grow, hopefully they're able to kind of respond to that.
Yeah.
and
Well, I mean,
prevent
there's
that.
no downside whatsoever. I mean, ecologically, there's really not a downside to having lots of herbivores everywhere.
Right.
But, you know, it's just what's feasible socially, you know, and probably you need bigger areas.
So in the Kahekili, are they allowed to use the gill nets?
No, I mean,
They
actually, I
can-
don't think there's a ban on gear, but, so that maybe is one of the issues, but technically you're allowed to use a gill net, but you're not allowed to catch the fish, which you'd like to catch with a gill net. So, I mean, I think actively using a gill net, you almost guarantee you will be breaking the law. I mean, I think almost certainly, but I don't know if you would be deploying a gill net in itself. It's not actually a crime, not illegal. Is that true? There's no
Well, you
gear
can
restriction.
surround that fish with a gill net.
Okay, because you're actively fishing and then you
Right.
can pick what you're going for.
And you can do it there as well, and I
Yeah.
think they do surround that for coolie and
Yeah,
for
so-
goldfish and things in the area legally.
On top of the reef or in the sand patch there.
I would hope it's not on top of the
Yeah.
reef, but I've seen them do it, it looks pretty close to the reef, so I don't know.
Wow.
Any last questions for Ivor? You guys good over there?
Yeah, no, it's great.
Okay.
Good.
It's a lot of bleaching right now, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I
You can out too, you guys see it out there or not?
Heavy, heavy, heavy.
Okay.